a social entrepreneur as a co-founder of 3BL Associates. He was the first Bahrain-based social impact consultancy and think-do tank. Right? 3BL was established with contributing to the MENA region's sustainable and regenerative development through providing social impact and sustainability consultancy services to companies, government, civil society, and through incubating its own collective impact initiatives. I'm sorry, I couldn't do this by heart. Tariq is also a biomimicry, a very interesting specialist, health entrepreneur, climate policy expert, and co-founder of the Arab Youth Climate Movement. Give him a big hand.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to share my story. And I was asked to share about that outer service. So when the water hits the water, and actually the lessons that I've learned in that process, when the water does hit the water. And when I think of that water and that ship, there's always that saying of the ship isn't meant to stay at the shore. And that's not the purpose of the ship. That's not the purpose of the water. And you can build that water with those values, and it's very beautiful. And I learned so much from all of you. And now I think about it, how do you bring that out into the sea, out into that ocean for your lives and your journeys. And I'll share just a couple of short stories in what I learned. And actually, part of my journey started a few years ago. I learned a lot from the South African movement. So there's something beautiful that Mandela said, which was vision without action is just a dream. And action without vision just passes the time. And the vision with action can change the world. And a couple of years ago, the Arab Spring protests sprung all over the Middle East and shook my world completely. The life that I had just disappeared literally overnight. And that was a time where I thought, okay, I'll take the time to assess my situation, to see how I can contribute. I'll take maybe a few months and I'll take some break. But actually, a week after the protest started, I had a chance to sit down with people who were involved in the Velvet Revolution in Europe, and those who are involved in truth and reconciliation in Africa, South Africa. And so they sat me down, and this Desmond Tutu, and he had this amazing laugh and this amazing joy. It's like, no. You know, there's one thing and one lesson you really, really need to take forwards. And actually, the biggest mistake that they made, both in South Africa, both in Europe, and all these different revolutions, is that they waited. They waited until the conditions were right to start action. They thought that, you know, we'd create these political conditions that were conducive to creating the education system that we wanted, the health system that we wanted, the communities that we wanted, the cities that we wanted, and that injustice had to be solved first and foremost to create those conditions, to bring communities together. But they're like, but that was a mistake, because we waited, and because we delayed, lives were lost. Because we delayed, actually, the problem became worse. And 20 years on, it sort of reflected that actually the education system is just as unequal. The health system is just as unequal in parts of sort of Europe and parts of South Africa. And actually, a lot of these different revolutionaries who shared, and actually the mistake that they made was that they didn't actually start on the action as well, and all the things that they wanted to do. And that what you should do is go back home and actually take action right now, and all the things that you actually envision. And that in that delay, you won't regret it sort of 20 years down the line, because generations do pass, and time does pass. So we learned from that, sort of very tangibly. In February, when Benghazi fell in Libya, we went in sort of straight away. This was 8 months before Gaddafi actually sort of fell. And we started to give peace and compassion training to the children of the rebels, actually, and to actually start building them in social entrepreneurship capabilities. And the same thing in Bahrain. So we had a lot of people who went to prison, and a lot of children who were very angry that their parents went to prison. And we started to do this Buddhist sort of peace and compassion training as well. And also at the same time, social entrepreneurship training. And the reason why we felt that was very important at that time was not to get a culture of rejectionism. And that was something that we very much felt was amongst the different activists and the social movements. And those who really went into that core and into that space of the heart, but felt so much frustration. But such was their frustration that they just wanted to reject everything. And when you go into that shore, and you pass that shore and into that ocean, you'll meet many people who don't align with those values. Many people who bring out that anger and that frustration. But it depends what you do with that, actually, and how does that serve you. And the approach that we really wanted to take was, and something Buckminster Fuller actually said, is to change an existing system, you don't fight against it. But to change a system, you create a new model that makes the old obsolete. But to create that new model, you still need the old to be part of that. So we very much wanted to rein in on that rejectionism, to really bring people into that, when we talk about that shared value space and what that can mean. But first and foremost, you needed to be able to cooperate with people who you probably had hatred against, you probably had anger against. And that's the approach that we really had to take, and it was very difficult for a lot of people, but it was the only thing that actually worked to turn that vision into that action. And an example of this, so we set up a year ago, the Arab Youth Climate Movement. So 1 year ago we had absolutely no climate change movement really in the Middle East. So we got together in Egypt, a gathering just like this. We created our vision. Each one made that choice, and they went out, and now there's a climate movement actually in every country in the Middle East. But what we learned actually, this is a region which is very much oil-based, and he was talking about the climate movement there, and we realized that the tactics that worked in the States and in Europe in terms of that protest and that activist approach maybe worked there. But it was interesting that for 20 years there was no progress whatsoever amongst a lot of these dictatorship type of regimes on sort of climate change policy and sustainability. So we took the approach of, okay, we're not going to be fighting against them, but let's open our arms. Let's try to understand their point of view. And actually, sort of 2 weeks ago, the progress that we made for 20 years, Arab governments spent sort of rejecting negotiations and climate talks. And because we actually started to understand their point of view and tried to open our arms to them, for the very first time, they didn't actually come out and reject climate change. And for the first time, they actually worked with civil society, which had never really happened before. But what they actually shared was that no one tried to really understand their view. Yes, they may be dictators to a certain extent. Yes, there are oppressive regimes. Yes, there are oil companies. But they're also human beings. And that was something that very much struck me, that, and all these people who share these values, may not share these values, to really understand where that came from. And I mean, I've had to deal with the same type of people who've sent police to tear gas me, to shoot at me. Thank God they missed. But again, it was still important to say, you can have that anger, and maybe there's a little bit sort of mistrust, but the only way that we actually then made that progress was actually saying, okay, so let's work together on this. We're not going to be fighting against you. We're going to try to understand you. We're going to be trying to create a new model that works for us both. And that was the only real way. It was compassion. It was radical compassion. Radical compassion, to the point where it really hurt actually to be compassionate to them. But it was the only thing that actually started to open. And I say this in a very tangible sense, but because to actually push that type of policy, to actually be in a position to collaborate with people who don't share your values. Those values and what you're cultivating now in that inner trail is so important for that outer trail, and it can't be separated. And sort of coming into that, and part of Sun, which is beautiful, is those shared value collaborations. So if you're able to reach out to the world, it's a very beautiful thing. Because to solve problems, no problem is in silo, of course, we know that. We talk about, it's not a set of problems really, but it's a system of problems. And to solve a system of problems, you need a system of solutions. You need to connect a lot of different groups together, to collaborate with a lot of different people. And that's where really, I think, some of the magic really happens. Where you really see why it was so important to cultivate that inner core. And sort of some of the examples that sort of I can use that we've worked on. So you can look at an issue like diabetes and health, which is something that we do. But diabetes is the #1 cause of blindness in the world, and is the #1 cause of amputations in the world. And it's also very much linked to climate change. So what we start to do is to bring the diabetes community, with the blind community, with the disabled community. And they had all these, what seemed to be silo issues, but actually the only way we could solve them systemically was to bring them together and to integrate them together. And it was the same thing on the policy level. So in bringing climate change and health, for example, they may seem as sometimes separate issues, but actually effective climate change policy looks like the same thing as effective health policy. But then actually that's where cultivating that core and being open to that and really seeing those connections is so important, and acting on that. And the best example for me of collective impact and creating shared value is actually where you just were before this, out in nature. And nature is a wonderful example of actually what it means to live from that core. There's a phrase that says, never does nature do one thing and wisdom another. And when we think about the world that we want to create, and sort of that type of connectedness and that type of oneness, but that already exists, really. It does exist, and it's all around us. It's that adjacent possible, that adjacent sort of future possibility. Nature has been doing a lot of the things that we're trying to do for millions and millions and millions of years. And there's a lot of sort of wisdom that we can actually tap into that. And sort of an example, and sort of very tangibly, so talking about biomimicry. And what biomimicry is actually learning from nature. So really studying nature's models, processes, systems, and designs, and trying to emulate them to again, solve human issues and problems. So I spend a lot of time, for example, studying ants. And if you look at an ant community, or leafcutter ant community, they have an agricultural solution, they have a housing solution, they have a waste management solution, they have a burial solution, they have a city solution, they have democracies, which are actually far better than our democracies. But it's not that all these are separate. The agricultural solution is linked to the health solution. Health solution is linked to the burial solution, linked to the city solution. And what they realize is that actually to solve problems on a broad basis for society, that again, you do need that systems approach. But not only do they do that for themselves, but they do that in a way that maintains soil health for the entire planet. And that is actually an existing example beneath your feet a lot of times, and sometimes you may step on them, of actually the society that we want to create. And it gives me a lot of hope because it is possible. It is being done, and it has been done. Humans may need to catch up on that. But I'd very much encourage you, when you do think about, again, those solutions that may align with that core, do think and ask yourself the question, what would nature do? And I can guarantee you there'll be some very, very interesting solutions that are very much aligned with that core, but also bring that to that outer service. And finally, to sort of finish off, one beautiful thing that nature does is cultivating resilience. And it's something in which you will need on your journeys, definitely. So nature takes disturbances and change and treats that as an opportunity and uses that as an opportunity. So yesterday in sort of the circle, I know I sort of felt a lot of frustration, a lot of sort of pain sometimes, the suffering of the world, and a lot of anger. And it's something that it's not easy to deal with, really. Because there is a lot of suffering in the world, of course. And it's about how do we keep walking and keep sort of walking forward, and also cultivating that patience, that virtue, really, whilst you still feel that suffering, whilst you still go after defeat after defeat after defeat, you're able to keep standing up. And really looking at every defeat, every opportunity, every feeling of suffering, every feeling of stress as that opportunity to cultivate the inner core, as that opportunity to cultivate that compassion and that love. And I sort of started with that Mandela quote, and I think I'll sort of end with the example of Nelson Mandela, who is someone who, before he went to jail, was someone who's very much willing to use violence, actually. Someone who's very much protesting and rejected quite a lot of things. But then he went to jail and he had a choice. That choice was that experience could have either destroyed him as a person, made him angrier, more bitter, really could not have gotten over that suffering, or use that opportunity, that change and that disturbance, really to cultivate that resilience, to cultivate that love, to cultivate that compassion, to actually then decide to reach out to the world. And that was his choice, and that was his choice of leadership. And even through that suffering, he gave so much hope to the world. And nature indeed brings that same hope to us every day. Yeah. So, but I have to share in some of my stories, and it'd be lovely to talk about it more later.
Wow.
Yeah.